Welcome, everyone. This is a customer panel on NSX for automation. Hopefully you're in the right place. If not, stay anyway. There's obviously plenty of seats, and it's better than being outside right now where it's about 1,000 degrees. So, like I said, customer panel on automation here. I am Scott Goodman. I'm a product marketing manager with VMware working on NSX. And we have a few customers here with us, and I'll let them introduce themselves so I don't butcher any names or titles or anything.
Hello, everyone. I'm Brian Petrowitz. I'm the Deputy CIO for the University of New Mexico.
Hi, my name is Andrew Tatsai. I'm with IHS Markit, and I'm Senior Network Engineer over there.
My name is Sean Jabro. I work for Polaris Alpha as a Systems Administrator.
All right, so this is going to be a pretty open forum. We'll take some questions at the end. We're just going to kind of run through this and get an understanding of how each of these guys' organizations are using NSX as it pertains to automation. So let's start off, and we'll go through each of you on this first one. There obviously had to be a reason that you were interested in NSX for automation, some kind of driving use case or driving business demand that got you there. So Brian, can you start us off and tell us just briefly what led you into NSX for automation?
Sure. So what I'll do is I'll relay a little bit of context about University of New Mexico and how all this ties together. About 5 years ago, the University of New Mexico, the IT was completely decentralized, meaning every different school, every different college had their own IT. And the problem is in most cases, they were completely under-resourced. One-person shop having to do, phones, apps, email, desktops, everything, end-to-end, server, storage, disaster recovery, all of that. And so about 5 years ago, we started providing services using VCAC. So we built the self-service portal and all of that to enable these departmental folks to be able to come in through the portal and deploy systems that we manage, backup, do DR, all of that stuff. But obviously the key missing component to that is networking. Going from physical machines to virtual machines to VCAC, it took the provisioning time down from 12 weeks to 3 weeks to 3 days to 20 minutes. But obviously there's a big gap in there about, deploying the network, deploying the firewalls, and then also the security components. And so that was one big component that drove us that direction. We eventually upgraded. We are now running VRA 7.2. And we needed the ability to do the network components as well as the firewalls. So it's really the agility and the automation piece is why we went down the NSX path. The two other major reasons are security. We really didn't trust our network security in any way, and so we went greenfield, microsegmentation, NSX. That's the path that we are headed down, and it's a pretty substantial improvement in security. Where before we really just didn't trust it. And then the third reason that we really want to go down that path, as you can see in the future, the tie with the cloud. So the ability to take a VM that you've built in your private cloud and be able to move it to the public cloud and not have to worry about changing the security posture. It seems pretty huge to me. And then back and forth. And then if you think about things like vendor lock-in and the ability to basically be able to move a VM from one cloud to another based on price or a feature set or whatever, and not have to change the network architecture, the security footprint, any of that stuff. Those are the main drivers, main reasons that we went down the path of NSX.
Great. Andrew, let's hear from you on this one.
Wow, man, you took a lot of my thunder there. Jeez. I got to come up with new stuff now. Okay. I think one of the main ones is that whole time to market. So coming from the systems engineering and operations side, there could be a perception that it takes a long time for operations teams to be able to roll out, the storage, the infrastructure, the networking side. NSX and, especially with the automation side, allows us to be able to really cut that down significantly. And that was very attractive to not only our developers, but also management. Lots of people going to the cloud, AWS, Azure. So if we can mimic or create a system that then they can use in-house, it's advantageous for the business, and it's there's an upfront cost to build out that capacity. But as you start to grow it, it really benefits the business, and you start to not have to use AWS all the time and make that bill go up higher and higher and higher.
Perfect. Sean?
Just to add on to that from the operations side of the house, We have a very heavy developer community in my company, and shadow IT is happening all over the place. So going with a product like NSX to be able to really lock down our security posture inside while still allowing them the ability to just spin up VMs in the environment and have automatic firewall rules in place to allow them to be as accessible as they need right off the bat is a huge deal for us. We were in a unique position where we were looking at automation previous to the purchase of NSX, and we ended up part of an acquisition. So our original plan got filtered a little bit, and we ended up being able to deploy out of greenfield for this brand new company. So we're building an entire new architecture with the automation pieces and NSX built in right from the ground up, while leaving the brownfield to sit and decay as everything moves in over time.
Cool. So I know Brian hit on this a little bit already about what the old manual processes looked like, how it took an eternity to get anything done. The other two of you guys, can you tell me a little bit about what was the before state, before automation, and after state in terms of how long things took, and was there anything that was already automated before NSX? I mean, a lot of times we see compute and storage provisioning has already been automated in some way, even if it's just scripted, and that the networking and security is the bottleneck. How did that work for you guys?
Yeah, we have a pretty heavy DevOps mentality moving forward now. At the time, pre-purchase of NSX, we were not very good at automating anything. And our mean time to production with any kind of system was weeks easily. And this is just a couple of VMs. We started building with Docker a long time ago, and our developers really wanted to start moving forward fast, and IT just could not keep up. We had to do more with less, as most IT shops do, but we were not even close to being agile enough until we started really adopting some of these automation processes. And even spinning up VMs through PowerCli, just running out scripts so that people can do that, automating, turning on HA, DRS, making sure we had all of the features enabled that we could, increased our licensing, made sure that we were able to automate some of that, because previously it was a matter of, if a host was over provisioned, we needed to manually migrate VMs as well. We needed to change the network settings specifically when we have external customers. We're a DoD shop, so we have external customers that want to be able to get in, but they have very strict security requirements on who's allowed to access what. And making sure that only those customers are able to get in and have these boxes accessible and secure. We've been building out firewall rules in certain VLANs, and all of this was, days to weeks in the making. For a VM that was already living, we'd have to change the networking, change the firewall rules at the edge, and make sure that everything was tested and still secure. And then when we had to bring it back in, we had to make sure that all those firewall rules were broken down. And what we're finding is we've got a lot of firewall rules that we have no idea what they do. And network guys don't want to turn them off. Now with NSX, it doesn't matter, because the VM go away, firewall rules
go with it. Exactly.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing. It really forced us to look ourselves in the mirror and find out that we needed to standardize more things in the environment. It's amazing how when product teams come up to you and they want to deploy a new feature set, or they want to deploy a new application or something, or even a new line of business, how much thought process has to go in there, and it turns into a snowflake design after a while, because you don't want to have that. I mean, you don't want an environment that's built out of just unique components, because then it becomes difficult to troubleshoot. So when you have to bring an automated component into your network, into your infrastructure, and you continually have to punch these things out, it forced you to create those standardized processes so that people will follow them, and then it creates a well-defined service offering. So if your developers, if security, if everyone knows what they're going to get out of your infrastructure, then there's less questions, because they can just pick from a blueprint of a couple templates of what you have, they can deploy, and then they can start doing their job.
Excellent. So let's go down the line and do the one word answer is, what cloud management system are you using to automate with NSX?
VRA.
VRA?
VRA.
VRA.
Okay, so we got 3 VRAs here. Common thing, obviously integrates very well with NSX, but we like to make the point that it doesn't have to be VRA. It can be VMware integrated OpenStack. It can be other OpenStack releases. We have customers across the board, and that's kind of NSX goes a little bit rogue sometimes in the company that, we say, yeah, you can use our internal solution, but we're pretty agnostic. It's the same idea as NSX overlaying the underlying physical hardware network. It doesn't matter what it is. We don't care if it's Arista or HP or Dell or Brocade or Cisco or anything. And it's the same way with the cloud management platform when you're talking about automating with NSX. It doesn't really matter what it is. VMware obviously offers a solution in vRealize automation, orchestration, VMware integrated OpenStack, but if you want to use other OpenStack releases or something else, it works that way as well. So obviously, it's not it's a mature product, not a perfect product. You're going to run into problems along the way, and you got to figure out how to overcome them, obviously. Brian, can you tell us a little bit about, what problems did you run into trying to automate at NSX and the difference between your expectation for how it would go and how it actually went?
There's a lot to that answer. What I would say generally, when you are looking at operations and you're trying to standardize not only what your end product is, but you're trying to standardize your process for getting there. Especially if you're in a fairly large IT shop, like going back to the example of just setting up VCAC the first time, we identified 100 different manual steps, and actually those are, I'd say, 100 large manual steps, going across 6 different teams. And so getting to the point that you understood exactly what it was that you were trying to do is the hardest part. Once you get it nailed down that you understand exactly what you're trying to do and how you're going to do it, then what you do is, you basically automate all of those steps so that people don't have to think about those 100 steps and those 6 different teams and the workflows that might flow through your different service desk systems. And so when you think about the number of steps that occur between the time a VM is initially built to something that is in the end deployed with a network and a firewall, the hardest part is nailing down everything that you have to do to get to that point of, I've got a VM with my firewall rules, right? And so there's probably well over 1,000 steps. But the key is with VRA and NSX, you can now get to the point where that's part of your blueprint, right? So you're deploying your machine, part of your blueprint. All of those 1,000 steps are now done like that. But the hardest part is understanding exactly how you're going to do that. And I would add to that, hopefully this is answering the question, but I would add to that the hardest part after that. So we've gotten to that point where we can deploy VMs with a base firewall rule set and a base network. The hardest part is now the operations after that because of the complexity. You have now where you used to have 1 or 2 options with the firewall, now you've got thousands, right? Tags, policies that can go any kind of direction, and trying to say when somebody says, I need this port opened on this machine to this group of IPs, the number of tags and the general flexibility of the product is making it so right now we are still trying to figure out exactly what our operations looks like after that initial deployment, because we keep having to bring everybody back in the room together rather than make it follow an operation where they're following a workflow through a service desk tool. We're still having to bring everybody back into the room to have the conversation, our security team, our platforms team, and our network team. What are we really doing here? And so they can actually nail down what policy, what tag, what IP set, all of that. So the hardest part is it's defining the process. Once you've got the process defined, you can then automate, and then once you've automated, now you don't have to worry about that process anymore. Hopefully that answers the question.
Good enough for me.
Yeah.
Sean, can you give us a brief answer to basically the same question? Is when you started automating, what was a challenge that you ran into that you didn't necessarily expect, and then what did you do to overcome it?
Honestly, one of the biggest challenges that I didn't expect was the pushback from the network administrators.
And that's actually a good point that you raised, because that's part of what we talk about around NSX is that it's not just a technological change. There's also a people and a process change involved in it. We're used to operating in these silos for the most part, and NSX starts to blur those lines and break down those barriers. So it can be a little bit challenging to figure out who exactly is going to do what. And like Sean is saying here, sometimes you might get a little bit of pushback from that, but go ahead.
Yeah, since it was all brand new to me, all of the the management, even the idea of the software-defined networking was brand new to me when I came in, because I came in as just a basic systems administrator. I took over the VMware infrastructure piece like 3 months before we got NSX. So everything was an unknown in my world. And getting the network and the security guys together in the same room, on the same page, was probably the most difficult part. They, at least from my experience, they were butting heads left and right because security wants all these lockdowns, and network was saying, no, I don't have time for all of this. I'm not gonna audit all of this. I don't have this. And I kept trying to explain to them, that's why we got this product. This is gonna help automate a lot of those pieces. And it's more of a, for us, it was a social change than anything else. The technological problems that we ran into along the way were mostly just caused by human error. We didn't get our MTU set right. Technical stuff that there were little pieces throughout the network that we didn't have set up correctly, and we ran into problems along the way. But that was kind of expected anyway.
All right. Let's stay on a kind of related topic here, and Andrew, I'll pose this one to you. What, if any, organizational changes did your company have to make in order to effectively use NSX and automation, or if none have been made, what do you plan to do in the future around that?
Well, I think I can answer that by starting with what you previously said on getting the network and security teams and the differences there. So coming from the network background, I'm the network guy here, I guess, on this panel. So, from our perspective, it was a tough transition at first because this is a brand new way of looking at networking. A lot of traditional networking doesn't rely upon the visibility that you get from that connection of NSX Manager to vCenter. You get so much more that you could build a unique security footprint that isn't based off of IP addresses or ports or things like that. You can really get more down into high-level policy and thought process of Windows, Linux, app, web, DB, however you want to really create this metadata or security tags around it. We can then build policy that's then dynamically associated to those VMs when they're spun up through VRA and VRO. So that's the cool thing, is you get to change how you think about your security posture instead of just us network guys thinking about IP addresses and port numbers and that's it. So once we got our heads around that, we got into the room with the security team, we were able to then take these, what may seem like unrealistic expectations in the past, and turn that into something that we could really do in a short amount of time. There's still an adoption period because operations teams can sometimes be a little bit adverse to change. So it takes a lot of training, it takes a lot of talking and working with them to make everyone feel comfortable. But after a while, you start to realize the benefits. And then when you can add that automation, that API on top of that, and you can start creating those standardized processes and kick these things out in templates, really, you get to see the benefits of the solution overall. So as far as changes to our staff or in any way, shape, or form of how we deal with it, it hasn't changed that much. With the role-based access that's there, it allowed our teams to be able, the network teams to be able to work with the security side, because we made separations of security teams and route switch teams in our network. The route switch guys were still able to maintain their ability of looking at inbound, outbound traffic that's going in, the overlay tunneling, and understanding that, while the security team can focus on the load balancing and the security postures and adding in new things that they need to until we get the automation piece in place. So from that perspective, not much. It's increased our engagement with security, which is probably a good thing because, we really should be friends.
Right.
And they usually don't like network guys, and network guys usually don't like security guys. So we have a dance off, and it's really weird. So, but anyway, it's been good. It's increased engagement between the teams.
Excellent. So let's shift gears here a little bit. And obviously, you go down this road of NSX and automation, and you experience it a certain way, and then, hindsight being that it's 2020, you realize if I had to go back, I would do X, Y, or Z differently. Brian, I know that your organization had a brownfield versus greenfield debate around NSX in general. Can you tell us a little bit about that and about what you wish you'd done differently?
Sure. So we went completely greenfield, and we had some really good reasons for that. We like I said, we just simply didn't trust our security. If you random interesting things could happen on our network, things that we thought were blocked and they're not blocked, and firewall rules, just thousands of them, mostly garbage, hard to make sense of it. Plus we had an aging network infrastructure, so we went greenfield because we wanted to say when a machine goes into this environment, it is going to be clean, it's going to be locked down. The other thing we did was we switched to spine and leaf architecture as opposed to the traditional 3-tier. So we chose greenfield for those two reasons. Last year I did a presentation with another gentleman from VMware, Brian Hesteva, who was presenting on this, it was kind of like a compare and contrast, who was presenting on a Swedish tax agency who had gone brownfield. And if I trusted my network, if I had some confidence and some faith in the security of my existing network and my underlying infrastructure, and I wasn't planning on making a fundamental paradigm shift, I likely would have gone brownfield. I think it would increase the speed at which you can deploy NSX because of the learning curve that's so big with NSX. And you can do it without substantial risk, I think. That said, I did a greenfield, and I can tell you that it was a lot of work to get it going. It's a massive culture shift, all the people and processes that you guys talked about, getting all of that in place. It's very helpful because now we know we're clean going into it. But I think it would have gone a lot faster if we had done brownfield. That said, for the two reasons I said at the beginning, I wouldn't have changed it. I just wish I was in a position where I could have gone brownfield. I just don't think our environment could have tolerated that. I think we still would have had mess.
Right. Yep. Sean, what about you? I mean, what have you run into or gone through rather that you wish you knew so that you would do it differently when you had to do it over again?
Well, like I said, we had a pretty unique situation where we were at. So going to greenfield, I mean, we threw a greenfield right down the middle of a brownfield, is what we did. And we're relying on it to be a virus and just kind of eat up all of the resources and the space in there. And the reason for doing it is that we had 4 companies coming together, all with their own processes, all with their own way of doing things. So we decided instead of trying to merge all of them together, we were going to build it fresh. So now we get new policies, new procedures, all of this. We have a little bit of brownfield in there because some of our older infrastructure, we became the primary infrastructure house for the entire company. We had the largest data center. So we have systems, like I said, that we need to expose to the internet, old legacy systems that we're still, we're now using NSX firewalling to allow out. And we have automated response. If one of them gets compromised, it's going to get locked down and all of its ports get shut down and it's not going anywhere. So we have a little bit of brownfield there, and if we had done that sooner, we could have avoided a few pitfalls there that was brought about by some dev teams that like to try to make things happen behind the scenes.
All right.
So pretty happy with the way we went.
Excellent. Let's shift gears a little bit here. Andrew, can you tell us a little bit, as we all know, there was the announcement, the general availability of NSX and VMware on AWS, now linking public and private clouds, on-premise public clouds, remote and branch offices, and all of that. Andrew, can you tell us a little bit about how does NSX and automation factor into whatever public cloud strategy you may have?
Well, especially with what's coming down the pipeline with NSXT, I think there's a lot of possibility. The fact that it can now extend into those clouds and we can have one pervasive security strategy, we can have that security policy pass through on-prem, off-prem, things like that in the future. That's an exciting thing. That makes our job, it easier. Instead of having these multiple, you can almost look at disparate data centers and security policies and making sure that they just fit within it and having to constantly audit them. If I have one single pane of glass, and boy, I really do hate using marketing terms, but if I have one way of getting to it, it makes it a lot easier for me to make sure that we're keeping to our security standards and our written policy. So that's exciting to me. I think that the possibilities of being able to bring in containers in the future, you want everything to follow that same strategy. You want everything to be secure, so that way we don't get called at 2 in the morning about an emergency or a security threat. So it brings peace of mind and my ability to sleep at night, because I do like sleeping.
Don't we all? Let's talk a little bit about use cases. Brian, I know that University of New Mexico has a pretty robust use case around multi-tenancy. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's actually, it's changing. So I had mentioned before that the University of New Mexico was completely decentralized. So basically we had customers all over campus and they all wanted their own individual bucket. And so when we started down the NSX path, that was the point. That's where we were going with it, was to be able to basically build tenants for each one of these departments. So about September of last year, so a year ago, we started consolidating IT, mostly for financial and effectiveness reasons. And so that model is starting to shift. So NSX was definitely going to enable us to build multi-tenancy. I think we have a little less need for that now, and now it's more shifting towards the real value that NSX is going to bring for us is the general security posture, the flexibility that goes along with the security posture. If you consider something like HIPAA or FERPA or PCI, and the fact that basically your security policy is tied to those specific machines, you have that, and I have research computing, ITAR, export control, all of those things. And then I've also got this other huge problem where I've got a big power problem with my data center. It's going to cost $2.5 million to fix. 2.5, and it's in a building that was built in the 1930s. So do you want to spend $2.5 million on a building that was built in the 1930s, right? So we're asking, what else would we do with that $2.5 million? VMware on AWS would be a good idea, but how do I do that, right? How do I take all my ITAR, my FERPA, PCI, and move it? I mean, there's only one way that that's really going to work successfully with a reasonable amount of effort over a reasonable time frame, and that's everything sitting in an NSX environment where I can move it and maintain the same security posture.
Excellent. Sean, can you tell us a little bit about how public cloud factors into your organization strategy?
Actually, pretty largely now. As the acquisition and we have a lot of acquisitions coming up as well. We're going to keep growing. It's a big part of our plan to allow all of our developers to be able to develop from anywhere in the world. So we're working on offsite data center as well as cloud data centers as well, to make sure that we have the ability to stand things up anywhere that we need to. And a lot of our customers are requesting the ability to stand up in these different infrastructures, so we need to be able to do it. And going out to Azure, going out to AWS, even Google, we want to make sure that we as an IT shop are able to do these things and capable to enable all of our users to deploy the things they need no matter where they are, and like I say, agnostic of resources, so we can have that all managed on the back end, automated, so that no matter what they want, no matter where they want, we have resources there for them. Mm-hmm. And that's going to be a really big push for us in the future over the next 18 months.
So you touched on something interesting there, is that the ability of customers and users to get what they need as quickly as possible. We have this concept in NSX for automation that we refer to as developer cloud, possibly a little bit of a misnomer, but what we're really talking about there is self-service portals, catalog items, basically creating a public cloud-like experience for internal customers, on an internal private cloud. Are you doing anything around that?
Well, yeah, absolutely, because we have a lot of like NIST compliance. We have government compliance where things are not allowed to be out in the public cloud. Mm-hmm. And also the ability to have the policy set to automatically determine this type of system is going to go private, this one's good enough, it can go public, and even do like some of the cloud bursting for like when our public sites are getting hit really hard and we have big events where we got people hitting our website and everything else. We can just kind of spin up more instances automatically and make sure that everything is solid, secure, and available the whole time.
Excellent. Andrew, let's talk about the same thing here. What is your strategy around self-service, and how has that changed from before NSX to post NSX?
We focus way more heavily on it. If we want to have a service offering that satisfies the requirements of our dev team and our solutions engineers to be able to continually develop and innovate and go faster time to market, we need to always be getting a feedback loop from them. We need to constantly make sure that we're improving the process and giving them exactly what they need. we don't like to think of it as like we're competing with other, public cloud like, Azure, AWS, but constantly when you're building a self-service portal on-prem, it's looked at as, well, it's as good as AWS, it's as good as Azure, because we can also do this stuff over there. So it's a challenge. I mean, we're in no way competing. We're, if anything, we're supplementing that.
Right.
And especially with these things like NSXT, we're going to be able to turn that into one gigantic service offering. But at the time, it just gives us a way to constantly try to make our stuff better.
Yeah, I think to add to that, our thought on this is more like we're escorting people to the cloud as opposed to competing, and we're doing it in a way that is secure. I can tell you I've got rogue IT everywhere and secured by developers and or just basic users without much security experience, and it's got sensitive data and it's all over the place. And so, when I go approach a faculty member and say, okay, you've got all your stuff out in AWS. Tell me about your FERPA compliance. Do you have all the data secured? No. Okay, well, how about if we do that for you, right? How about if we handle the security components through the self-service portal? You can still use Amazon and all the features. So it's, looking at it as we're sort of escorting to the cloud is really the way we think of it.
And it's interesting that you say that, because going back to how much speed that we've achieved in doing automation and NSX and things like that, it's not like these requirements have changed at all. We still have, in traditional methodologies that in architectures, we've had to look at these same things, but instead we've had to, interact with the storage team, the network team, the security team, the infrastructure team, and each one of them have to participate, give their own opinions, and then we'll implement that change. And that could take, weeks, months or so, depending on how big the project is. We're just able to react faster. We're still doing the same assessments. We're still making sure that everyone's involved, but the service offerings are standard and they're automated. There's no potential for human error. There's no, I had to touch this firewall and this firewall, and this network engineer was groggy from a long night of on-call and he missed that rule, and now the ticket has to be reopened and people are angry. To them, they don't care. It didn't work. We have the excuse that we could say, wow, it's complicated. But at the end of the day, the developer doesn't care, the management and business doesn't care. We need to get that stuff working upon first try, and when it closes, that it works and it does exactly what we say. So all of that stuff, all of these service offerings that we get in there are enabling us to be able to make sure that we do exactly what we say and meet those security compliancy requirements that we have.
And it helps to kind of negate the shadow IT that can happen, because they don't want to wait that 8 weeks for things to change. So you don't have a developer coming to you saying, hey, can you help me fix my AWS instances that you didn't know about?
Yeah. Hey, VRA and NSX are allowing us to, the way I think of it, is keep up with customer demand. Unrealistic customer demand.
Boy, that's so true.
Before it was just completely unrealistic that we could ever keep up with, I need this right now, right now, right now. Well, now we can, because we have automation tools that do it.
Excellent. So you guys all kind of touched on compliance there and the idea of auditability, and when you blueprint something and you spin up resources and you deploy it, something's wrong with it, well, you know where the problem was. It was in the blueprint. It wasn't some snowflake configuration that somebody hit the wrong button and all of that. How much has NSX and VRA in all of your case, how much has that simplified compliance and auditability for you?
I would say pretty well. It's taken, like I say, all these processes that we have to put together and just bundled them up. And there was the iterative process, and you have to deal with the developers, you have to deal with the teams to make sure that as you're building it, you get the pieces in place. So there's still that ramp up time on any new project and new deployment that you're trying to build. But once it's there, you have it. It's solid, it's repeatable, and it's fast.
From an auditability standpoint, what I, kind of taking this into a different direction, with using Log Insight and things like that, and I can actually see the traffic that's going to it from a virtual machine perspective. I can dive right into the NIC and I can see, because never have the network team been questioned that it's the firewall, or it's always the network's fault for some reason. That never happens. The fact that I can jump into the VNIC and I can start looking at the traffic, and I can go to the developer, to the person, and say, no, it's actually open, and I can see the connection coming in and show them logs and Log Insight and show them the whole path. That's pretty cool and pretty interesting, because then my mean time to instance is a lot quicker than previously what it was a long time ago.
Cool.
Yeah, the other thing that's interesting, if you think back in the olden days when we used to build servers, and what it would take to build a compliant server and then hand it over to a developer who's doing who knows what with it, right? Mm-hmm. And then they break it and they're not happy with it, or something happens and then you're rebuilding the server. If you consider that world to the world where we say just deploy it and take a snapshot before you make the change, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's deployed with a compliant blueprint. They're banging away at it. Something goes wrong. Okay, just roll back to the last snapshot, and don't call me. Don't put a ticket in for me. Just roll back. I mean, that's huge. That if you think about the amount of labor that removes, it's massive, and it keeps it compliant because it's all standardized from the beginning.
Cool. So let's talk. I know we've alluded to it here in the conversation, but let's talk about what is NSX and automation in the future hold for you guys. I know that there's all this public cloud stuff that's been announced. There's the container integration that's been announced. What are you looking forward to doing, or what are you even if you maybe don't have the budget or the manpower to do it now, what do you want to do with NSX in your fantasies, and automation?
Well, we're heavy Docker and container utilization. So the announcement there for the PKS was actually pretty exciting for me. Mm-hmm. We want to have something like that running that is able to be maintained and managed with NSX. So the developers can have a stack spun up, like a Kubernetes stack, however we want to do it. Currently, we're using Vic, we're using Ansible to deploy containers out, and being able to blueprint out the deployment of the containers across the different clouds with a solid security posture is a really big deal for us, and that's really where we want to be with cross data center networking and container.
Excellent.
My wildest dreams of what it could do. You know what? Honestly, I look at it holistically from everything in the data center. Nothing goes in our data centers that doesn't have some way of being able to roll in an automated fashion or something greater. It has to work into it. If we put in devices or features or whatever that doesn't have an API, it doesn't have any way for us to be able to automate it in some way, shape, or form, it doesn't belong in our data center. Mm-hmm. So NSX fulfills that component. The ability for me to have an API that I can talk and do anything that I need to do. I can send REST API calls. I can have a VRO plugin go in. I can bring that into a Blueprint VRA and start automating things. I can roll it into anything that I want. That right there just gives me the power to do whatever I want. So as long as that continually moves forward in our environment, it doesn't matter what components I bring in. It can fit into the greater picture. So I just like the fact that I can do that. It's way, way better than what we had in the past. So as a network guy, I'm thrilled about it.
Awesome.
In a perfect world, I'd like to have DevOps. True development environments that are completely blueprinted with snapshot capabilities. So a developer needs something, they deploy it, they deploy 5, 6 of them, whatever, and snapshot their changes, and the whole time they don't have to call us to build machines for them or blame the server because something went wrong. They know for sure that when they rolled back to the last version, what the change was the app that they loaded, right? And so DevOps, huge. Cloud portability is huge because we are going to be forced to go to the cloud headlong, and then avoiding vendor lock-in, the ability to have hybrid cloud with the ability to switch clouds to always sort of keep that leverage on the vendor so they can't keep jacking up the prices on you. Mm-hmm. And I've had this, I keep trying to imagine this world where NSX could be used in some way in some future date. I can't figure out exactly how it could work, but I'd love to see it protecting endpoints on the network. And that's imagination. I have, that's a fundamental shift. But man, if I could do that, right? Because I've got 60,000 devices on my network that just create explosions, of viruses and things like that at a university. If I could somehow figure out how to use that same sort of functionality in a BYOD world, that would be heaven.
That must be a nightmare.
I'll get right on it.
Yeah.
Well, honestly, it's working into a greater security footprint. So, I mean, traditionally in networking, we've always had to use firewalls and different features and load balancers and things like that to be able to try to secure older applications, or like what I like to call heirloom assets, things that, I'm going to pass that mainframe down to my grandkids one day and they can feel the pain that I did. But, when we start to get closer and closer, when we bring intelligence or the ability to bring intelligence into the network in a greater way of identifying VMs or other application sets into a security posture, then that's great. And then if we can extend that a little bit further into the endpoint and start protecting what may be some old servers that don't have the ability to be upgraded, or maybe that developer left 10 years ago, if we can find a way to be able to secure that and help make sure that it could still do its job, but do it in a protected manner, then it doesn't really matter it sets a bad precedent that we're not trying to tell developers, write a bad application because it's cool, we got you. But at least it gives us a way to protect ourselves against the ongoing threats that are happening in the industry right now.
Right. All right, I think at this point we are going to open it up for questions. So if you've got a question for these guys who know what they're talking about, rather than me, who's just corralling people here, come on up to the mic. Otherwise, we can always answer questions after the fact as well. But if you've got any good questions for anybody, come on up. Oh yeah, I guess all this nonsense. Please take the survey. They told me to say that. I don't know what they're for or what they do.
You check that box.
But we do refine these sessions based on feedback. So, if you get a couple minutes after this, go ahead and fill out the survey. And again, thanks for coming, and we'll take some questions now.
Brian, you spoke to my biggest fear probably of migrating to NSX, the process of taking your traditional layer 3, layer 4 firewall policies that you have and working within the new flexibility that NSX offers. How can you kind of speak to how long you've been going through this process of identifying how to do naming conventions, how to get people to do security tags, which tags are good to use? Can you go through some of the learning process and any of the gains that you've found over those years, and anybody else if you've had this experience as well?
Sure. I'm almost tempted to invite Carlos and Vish from my team up here to answer that, because they're going through it. They're currently going through it, and we're still trying to figure out exactly how we're going to do it operationally. So when you get all the folks in the same room, you can have agreements on how things should be set up, but the naming convention, how much time do we spend on naming convention?
It's a big one.
It's been months. I mean, yeah, I mean that's what you get into, right?
So do you think maybe a top-down approach is better than a bottom-up approach to this? I mean, do you think having somebody set this at the outset?
So
Yeah, for us.
I think to put a philosophical spin on it, I think this is the way that I see this problem. So there's that thing out there called, common sense. And common sense is only true if it's common, right? Common knowledge. And the problem is this is such a fundamental shift. Common sense actually has to be developed. So what I'm watching my teams do are inch by inch, step by step, turning something unknown into something commonly understood by going through it. We get a certain amount down the path, and then We go a little too far, and then we realize we didn't cover something. Bring the Tiger team back together. Define it. Let's all get on the same page. But it's trying to figure out what common sense looks like, because you're now in a world where, again, you used to have a few options, now you have thousands. And everybody has to think the same way. You have to set up the same structures, the same standards, same naming conventions, following policies. All of that stuff has to become common within your organization, and the teams that do that work have to be on the same page, or you're going to make a gigantic mess. So it's a lot of effort, it's a lot of work, and it's a lot of time, I think, for the groups to get on the same page. Because there's 1,000 different decisions you can make, and any one of them work. You just have to agree you're on one of them, and that everybody's in fact going to do that.
Oh, absolutely. That is my biggest fear of this process. I'm from the Ohio State University, by the way. We are very decentralized. It's a very, very commonality.
Sean,
For us, the naming convention thing was actually, we had to bring all of the groups together. It was very iterative, and that was, you say, like one of the things we didn't see coming. Generally, we went into it thinking that we would be able to set this naming convention and have these policies in place, and what we found is it was very iterative, and we had to keep bringing the group back together. You kind of you fail forward with it,
right? Yeah.
And eventually we hit a point where now all of the groups, while not happy with the naming convention overall, they understand it, and we're able to move forward on it. The biggest thing is getting the consensus, getting the documentation, and then making sure everybody knows. You train people on it, and you tell them they have to know what's going on and why. If you can explain to the people why you have this naming convention, because ours, especially specifically the VM naming convention, is a big deal, because we're using very specific pieces of the VM name to apply the different policies to it.
And to add on to that, it's the hardest thing to do, because if you're using the naming convention, for example, you need to make sure that there's an automated process behind that every single time that thing's spun up, that it mimics the name. And you can't, and if there's manual intervention, it takes a key understanding of that component and how much tied in it is to the overall solution and your security footprint, that it needs to match and needs to be right. If it's wrong, then you're going to have issues and you're going to be troubleshooting, and what you've already assumed was there may not be, and it's going to cause big problems with your security, and things won't work. The ports aren't going to be opened up, and it won't be identified appropriately in a dynamic service group. So, when you create any system that you create will work. It doesn't matter. There is no right way of doing this. I mean, that's the dirty secret here. You can do it any way you want. You can identify VMs based on security tags, on name, on logical port group, on the data center that it's in. You can do anything you want, as long as it's a laid out, documented process that the team understands and is communicated over and over. It'll work. That's what's cool about it. You have the options. But getting 20 people in a room in different areas and having everyone agree upon something is probably the biggest problem. It's not a technology problem. It's a communication, and it's a
cultural
problem.
thing.
I actually think it's a learning problem. Everybody's coming at it from a different perspective, and they're trying to figure out how to get on that same page. They're all learning from each other.
I will say this: it's helped us actually all put on our security hats in a much tighter fitting fashion.
Absolutely.
All right.
Thank you.
Anyone
Yes,
else?
you pointed out the biggest problem.
Way to go. Who invited him?
So whenever we create a load balancer, it's actually going to be a VM, right? So it's spinning up a VM in NSX. So if you have 1,000 applications and the user is going to go ahead and spin up a load balancers, how are you guys managing them? How are you guys basically creating the DNS host records? Because those VMs are going to have a GUI assigned to those VMs when they spin up, right? Are you guys actually doing it in production environment, or are you guys doing those load balancers in non-prod environment? What is the best practices you guys are following?
For us, all the load balancers that are spun up by automation are for development, so we don't really.
Use for production.
What's that? No.
For production environment.
No, we have some manual ones set up in production for the greenfield environment we have, but that's all done. That was a manual process for us, and we didn't do anything.
Was there any constraints that you guys identified when you guys think about going for the load balancers?
There's some, we run the Microsoft ADFS, and ADFS has very specific calls that you can make, especially was it 3.0. It's got a very specific call that it wants to make that NSX did not actually have built into it originally. And actually, I don't know if it still does. So we're just doing like a 443 answer request.
Just to go for a production environment, or just stick with the dev and see how it goes in the future?
I like how it's working for us now in the production environment. You'd have to actually talk more to our network and security guys to get that. We actually have an NSX Ninja in-house who handles that. Yeah, you got to go through like the 3 weeks of training. So he would actually be able to talk more to that. But
I think the answer to that yet again is, and I hate to harp on this, automation. So it depends. The answer to your question is it depends, like anything else in networking especially. In our environment, we have applications engineers also have to interact with the load balancers. So we have many different physical load balancers that are out there. I'm not going to name names, but they have the ability to go in there and they can make virtual servers and pools and VIPs, everything like that. They can do anything that they want. And then from the network side, we care about what OS level it is, the plumbing, so making sure that we have the VLANs trunked in there, or all the routing and switching, all that aspect. We have the ability to then, give them selective access, based on role-based access, of course. In NSX, I will be 100% forthcoming here. It's the role-based access for separating that type of detail is not there yet. But this is where you bring in automation tools to help facilitate that. If you build in the components that they can do all that stuff from a VRA front end, they can click the blueprint and do that, it makes it easier to manage. They can select the environments. You shouldn't really be thinking about, I have 1,000 products and 1,000 load balancers. How in the heck is my team going to manage this? You want to automate that problem away. So let's not harp on the fact of how we did it beforehand. Build strategies and solutions that you don't have to worry about that as you scale.
Yeah, and there are also plugins like for the DNS. VRA has plugins for info blocks and things like that, so that you can, again, more automation. We are actually not using the load balancers yet. We are still using our physical load balancers because everything we need to load balance is coming from outside of the data center. And we like sort of having that proxy and SSL offload and all of that still sitting out there. At some point, we are going to have to make that leap into load balancing in NSX, particularly when we get to the cloud.
Thank you.
I have a question actually, because one gentleman was talking about what do you call naming conventions. So I wrote the document. I'm from University of New Mexico. So the naming conventions, it took a while for us to come up with. Right. More important than naming conventions in NSX is there are these security groups, there are these security policies, right? And we come up with so many rules. Imagine there are 3,000 rules. There is no automatic policy checking, and that doesn't exist in the market right now. So for you, in NSX, right, the NSX folks, that should be the big thing. Verney gives you an insight of what policies could be for future, but in the market it doesn't exist right now. How do we do automatic policy checking for these dynamic policies? Because that would be a chaos actually. If you look at different services, different applications,
Have you looked at Network Insight?
Yeah, that's what.
Yeah, that's what
you're talking about.
they run that.
I don't think that's a technology problem. You have the same problem with physical firewalls now.
Yes.
If I have Palo Alto, Cisco, Fortinet, SonicWall, it's all the same. So what we're looking at here is not a technology problem. What we're talking about is an auditability and how do I continually maintain this? How do I give access to this self-service portal that they create 50,000 rules and then they break something? How does the operations team know exactly where it was? How do we fix it? Or is it even being used anymore? I think that's, some features like, when you spin down a machine, it kind of goes out of the group and all those different things. It can help with that, but it's not a perfect world. I think you have to build, yet again, within your automation strategy and what you're doing, you need to have the ability to go through and quickly identify what's not being utilized anymore and clean that up. But there's still very much, it depends on how your organization is built.
It's not automated, right? So we are manually looking at 3,000 policies. I inherited 3,000 policies.
Sure.
How fast can
but I can write scripts that'll scrape through all of that and tell me what hasn't been hit, or clear hit counters and send me back all those things, and then tell me, oh, this can be marked for deletion in 6 weeks or so, or a week or so, and then it'll go through on a REST API call and it'll delete it.
So some of that's available in the Palo Alto, though. I guess I think is the point Vish is making the request is to say some of the functionality that we see in our Palo Altos would be very nice to see in DFWs.
Sure.
that's I think what he's. But your point, well taken.
Yeah, I look for ways to, outside of the box to be able to solve a problem like that, because, that's a long-standing issue that we have anywhere. I mean, that's in infrastructure, things are left around, and, you have VMs that are sitting there that may not be used by that developer in 6 months, but oh my God, I still need it just in case, on a rainy day.
What you're saying is, like, there are so many services, so many ports, any logic that you want to write, it's not like, there's not like API, I can use like some tool to actually do that, right? Like it's a huge process. It's like as you're talking about scripting, I'm right now using APIs for vSphere, right, to automatically create VMs for myself. Also APIs for NSX and VRA to automatically provision VMs, right?
Yeah.
So, and that's the way to go, right? Like instead of like manually, like how we were saying, like have all this, right, all this process steps. That to me is value with the APIs. But again, coming back to the point, there's nothing that exists in the market right now that does policy checking across the board.
Sure.
Be it in firewalls or be it in NSX.
And in long-term view, honestly, it's funny how it works. Like in the very beginning, when you're trying to figure out all the standards and procedures, it's hard because you have to get everyone to figure out what you want to do. Then you lay out that policy. Then you go ahead and you start programming, and actually creating the scripts to create this stuff is really, really easy. That's why it becomes really, really bad when it keeps on, everyone's deploying, and then you get 50,000 rules in your firewall. And then you get back to the hard part of, okay, well, how do we clean up? How do we constantly maintain that this is manageable and it isn't going out of control? So that's a challenge with the private cloud, if anything, because at least with AWS and Azure, you create these VPCs and they may be separated out, and there's a certain amount of, it's obfuscated away. You don't really have to care about it too much unless you're the operator that has to maintain it constantly. But in a private cloud, at the end of the day, the infrastructure team is still responsible for it, and we need to make sure that things aren't going nuts. So the only advice I can give you is whatever you're creating, whatever process you're doing, think about the full scale. Think about cleaning up. Think about how you're going to maintain it all the way. If you get all the way to the point of creation, you've only battled half of the actual fight. Go all the way.
I think this is, we got time for last one here.
Are there certain processes that you've wanted to automate that you haven't been able to, and that you might in the future, or could you?
I would love NSX to cook me breakfast in the morning all the time and make me coffee.
Yeah, I think it's a matter of time and priority and resource. I mean, it's that defining what it is you're trying to do, and then figuring out what's most important. Usually it's the things that are eating your lunch. What's consuming most of my staff's time? Those are the first things we want to automate. I think the answer is that'll never stop. I haven't seen any significant limitations, which I think might be the real question. But yeah, there's a never-ending amount of things.
There's an abundance of tooling, and the only thing that stops you from automating is really your imagination.
Yeah. I mean, you have so many, that's what's exciting about today in this industry is there's so many different tools, products, feature sets, all with APIs. You can build, if being a systems engineer in the past was pretty much, if you're a network engineer or systems engineer, we use these tools, we use these modules that we put these things together and we created service offerings and we created an infrastructure. But in this case, with all the APIs and all the things that we can do, you really are an engineer because you could build out something completely custom to your environment that fits for your business to make you guys faster, better, stronger. That is the possibilities of that are endless. So then when you come to get a use case, you could think outside the box and solve it that's completely unique but standardized for your company.
All right, I think we are just about out of time here. Thank you everybody for coming. We'll stick around here for a few minutes afterwards if you want to come up and not do this all on a recording. So thanks everybody for coming. And thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Sean, Andrew.